It's time to pull back the curtain on a scandalous power play unfolding right before our eyes. This isn't just about firearms. It's a direct confrontation between the people's representatives and an emboldened Department of Justice. We are exposing the deep-seated corruption of unelected bureaucrats who seek to control you rather than protect you. This isn't just about firearms. It's about who actually makes the laws in this country, our elected officials, or unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. We're going to dive deep into how the DOJ is actively sabotaging legislative intent, trampling on constitutional precedent, and dragging us perilously close to a federal gun registry that Congress has explicitly rejected. Today, we expose the deep-seated corruption within the system that claims to protect us, but instead seeks to control us. What we are seeing here is nothing short of a boxing match, a bureaucratic slugfest between Congress and the DOJ over the future of the NFA, or the National Firearms Act, specifically as it pertains to items that are supposed to move to zero taxation. The stakes? Your right to own certain firearms without being registered like a common criminal. We're talking about a legislative intent so clear, so undeniable, that it should be etched in stone. Yet the Department of Justice, the very body sworn to uphold the laws of this land, is actively working against it. Now, for those of you who might not know, the NFA, passed back in 1934, was originally structured around a taxation model. It imposed excise taxes and registration requirements on certain types of firearms, like machine guns, short-barreled shotguns, and suppressors, primarily under the guise of controlling gangster violence during the Prohibition era. The key here, the crucial point, is that its constitutionality has historically been defended as a tax statute. That's the bedrock, the foundation. If you remove the tax, you fundamentally alter the legal basis upon which it stands. Fast forward to today. Congress, in its wisdom, or perhaps out of sheer political necessity, has legislated that certain items, which previously fell under the NFA's purview, will move to a zero taxation status, effective January 1st, 2026. Now, according to the legislative architects, the intent behind moving these items to zero taxation was not just to eliminate the financial burden, but crucially, to also eliminate the registration requirements and all the other hoops you have to jump through. It was supposed to signal an end to the NFA's application for these specific items, a clear, unequivocal message from the legislative branch. But here's where the unelected, unaccountable bureaucracy rears its ugly head. Representative Andrew Clyde, a staunch defender of the Second Amendment, along with a host of other members of Congress, sent a letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi, clearly stating this legislative intent. They essentially said, "Hey DOJ, we legislated zero taxation for these items, and our intent was that this would also end the onerous registration requirements." You would think that a clear directive from Congress, from the very body that writes our laws, would be respected. You would think the DOJ would say, "Understood, Congress. We will align our legal interpretations with your clear intent." But no. What happened instead? The DOJ decided to completely double down on defending the NFA in ongoing court cases like Silencer Shop Foundation versus ATF and Brown versus ATF. They filed their own motions for summary judgment, essentially saying, "Congress, we hear you, but we're going to do what we want." They submitted briefs that, while creative, were absolutely, unequivocally, in defense of maintaining the NFA's registration requirements despite the zero taxation provision. This isn't just a legal disagreement. This is a direct, in-your-face challenge to the authority of Congress. It's the executive branch, through its DOJ, actively telling the legislative branch to buzz off. They received the first letter, they understood the intent, and they still proceeded to work against it. This is not about interpretation. This is about an ideological agenda overriding the will of the people, as expressed through their elected representatives. It's a power play, plain and simple. So, after the Department of Justice completely ignored Congress's initial polite request, doubling down on their defense of the NFA, Representative Andrew Clyde and his congressional colleagues were apparently so shocked by this blatant defiance that they sent another letter to Attorney General Bondi. And this time, the language is far more pointed. It reveals the ugly truth they won't tell you about how our government is supposed to function, versus how it actually operates when the stakes are high for individual liberty. The second letter, which is now part of the official record, expresses serious concern and disappointment that the DOJ has chosen to advance a theory that not only conflicts with Congress's express intent, but also disregards the constitutional structure upon which the NFA has rested since 1934. Now pause right there. Constitutional structure. This isn't just about semantics or a minor legal squabble. This is a fundamental challenge to the principle of separation of powers. Listen to what they just said. The Department of Justice has chosen to advance a theory that not only conflicts with Congress's express intent, but also disregards the constitutional structure. This is the Article I branch, Congress, literally begging an Article II branch, the executive, to effectuate the clear intent of the legislature. It's a quasi-separation of powers argument, but it's more than quasi. It's a direct plea for constitutional fidelity. When the legislative body passes a law, its intent should be the guiding star for the executive branch's enforcement. To ignore that intent, to actively work against it, is to undermine the very foundation of our system. It's the DOJ essentially saying, "We know what you meant, Congress, but we're going to decide what the law really means, because we have the power to do so." Congress goes on to point out a crucial legal precedent, the Supreme Court's ruling in Haynes versus United States back in 1968. This landmark case made it abundantly clear that the NFA's registration requirements are inseparably linked to its taxation provisions. Think about that for a second. Inseparably linked. If there is no tax, if the tax is $0, then the very bedrock upon which the registration stands crumbles. The DOJ's argument seeks to tear down decades of Supreme Court jurisprudence, to essentially invent a new constitutional basis for a law that has always been, fundamentally, a tax statute. And why are they doing this? The congressional letter spells it out. The DOJ's theory would effectively transform the NFA from a tax statute into an independent federal gun registration regime. This is the nightmare scenario. A federal gun registry is something Congress has never authorized, has repeatedly rejected, and in fact expressly prohibited in the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986. Let's be crystal clear about the Firearm Owners Protection Act, or FOPA, of 1986. This was a bipartisan effort to limit federal power over firearms to prevent exactly this kind of overreach. A key provision of FOPA 86 was to prohibit the federal government from establishing a national gun registry. The DOJ's current stance isn't just ignoring legislative intent. It's actively attempting to circumvent a law specifically designed to prevent what they are now trying to create. And here's where the DOJ's hypocrisy shines like a beacon. Congress points out that the DOJ has in the past refused to defend federal laws when they determined those laws no longer rested on a valid constitutional basis. Case in point, during President Trump's first term, when the Obamacare penalty was reduced to $0, the Department of Justice refused to defend the underlying flawed law. They found their courage then, didn't they? They decided they could choose not to defend a statute when it suited their political objectives. But when it comes to defending the Second Amendment, when it comes to upholding the rights of American citizens, suddenly they are rigid constitutionalists, willing to invent new legal theories to maintain federal power. It's a transparent, two-faced approach to the law, where principles are applied selectively, based not on justice, but on political agenda. This isn't about upholding the law, it's about control. And it's a direct assault on the fundamental principle that the people, through their elected representatives, make the laws, not unelected bureaucrats with an agenda. So, what does all of this mean for you, the lawful and responsible gun owner, for every American citizen who believes in the sanctity of our constitutional checks and balances? The DOJ's defiance, their blatant disregard for legislative intent and established Supreme Court precedent, isn't just a wonky legal debate, it is a clear and present danger to your freedoms. If the Department of Justice is allowed to unilaterally redefine the NFA from a tax statute into an independent federal gun registration regime, despite explicit prohibitions from Congress in the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986, then we are on a very slippery slope. This isn't just about silencers or other specific NFA items, it sets a terrifying precedent. It tells the executive branch that they can twist, ignore, or reinterpret any law to suit their agenda, even if it flies in the face of what Congress intended and what the Supreme Court has previously ruled. The ultimate consequence here is the establishment of a full-blown, pervasive federal gun registry. This is the worst fear of millions of gun owners across this country, and for very good reason. A national gun registry is not just a benign list. It is a tool for control, a blueprint for confiscation, and a massive infringement on individual liberty. It shifts the burden of proof. making you, the innocent citizen, the target of government scrutiny. It makes you a number in a database, easily tracked, easily targeted. This is not some conspiracy theory. This is the direct outcome of the DOJ's current actions. And let's address the political rhetoric here. The source material mentions President Trump being the most pro-Second Amendment president in our nation's history. And while he certainly had some policies that were friendly to gun owners, if his own Department of Justice is actively working to establish what amounts to a federal gun registry, then we have to question how pro-Second Amendment the entire administration truly was, or any administration for that matter. This is political theater. They trot out the pro-Second Amendment rhetoric, they attend the rallies, they make the speeches, but behind the scenes, the DOJ, an arm of the executive branch, is actively dismantling those very rights. It shows that even when a president claims to be on your side, the unelected bureaucracy can still run wild with its own agenda, often unchecked. It exposes the deep-seated hypocrisy within Washington, D.C. that allows politicians to say one thing and allow their agencies to do another. This defiance is a dangerous precedent, not just for gun owners, but for all American citizens. If the DOJ can do this with the NFA, if they can ignore Congress and Supreme Court precedent to expand their power over firearms, what else can they do? What other laws can they twist, ignore, or redefine to suit their agenda? This is about executive overreach, about agencies becoming laws unto themselves, effectively undermining the delicate system of checks and balances that our founders put in place to protect us from tyranny. It's about the erosion of liberty by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts. The legal battles in Silencer Shop Foundation versus ATF and Brown versus ATF are therefore not just niche cases about gun accessories. They are critical flashpoints in the ongoing war for our constitutional republic. They are tests of whether the executive branch can simply ignore the legislative branch and historical legal precedent. The system is rigged by unelected bureaucrats with an agenda that often runs contrary to the will of the people and the clear intent of the laws passed by their representatives. This is a blatant disregard for the checks and balances of power, and it is a direct, insidious threat to the fundamental rights of American citizens.